Does the defense wish to make an opening statement?
I do, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm that attorney that was sitting over there at the table that you guys have never met before. My name is Jeffrey Leichel, and I represent Grant Amato, and I'll be representing him during this penalty phase. It's been a long month. Y'all have sacrificed a lot, and you've worked very hard. And on behalf of Mr. Dowdy, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Gilbert, and my client, I want to thank all of you for that. The one thing that I do want you to understand is that we on the defense team, we respect the verdicts that y'all have returned. We don't question it. We don't gnash our teeth about it. You have fulfilled your duty during the guilt phase of this trial, and it will not be an issue. As Mr. Stone correctly stated, the evidence that was brought up during the guilt phase of the trial is evidence that you should consider when you guys are deliberating. But I want to talk about the difference between a guilt phase and a penalty phase. See, now, in the guilt phase, during that 8 hours that you guys were deliberating, the ultimate goal was for all of you jurors to come to a unanimous decision. All of you had to reach the same conclusion in order to sign that verdict form. Kind of like it's either a green light or it's a red light. But in the penalty phase, each of you, each individual juror, as you deliberate, you are allowed to make your own decision. A unanimous vote is only required to recommend death. It's not required for life. These deliberations by you as individual jurors are moral in nature. There's no right decision or wrong decision. If two of you disagree as to what the sentence should be, guess what? You're both right. There is no wrong decision, and you will have fulfilled your duty. So your job is to find the right answer. Mr. Stone is going to be making his arguments that the right answer is death. We on the defense, we are going to be making the argument that life is the appropriate sentence. Life without the possibility of parole, meaning that Grant Amato will be behind prison bars for the rest of his life. He sits here today 30 years old. That means he's probably looking at 40, 50 years behind bars, and he'll never get out. And that's a consideration that you should think about when you're making your individual determinations. So, what is the right answer? Well, again, everyone comes into this courtroom with their own life experiences, their own moral commitments to how they deal with things. Those can be as different as what church to attend, where to send your kids to school, how you feel about abortion, how to deal with your parents as they get old and begin ailing. Everyone here brings their own life experiences into this jury box, and that's why it's important that you maintain those when you go back and decide the fate of Grant Amato. Now, when we talk about deliberating, again, you guys were out 8 hours during the guilt phase. There was probably a lot of deliberating going on back there. because y'all were trying to reach a unified decision. In this case, in the penalty phase, deliberation basically means after carefully considering, which is included in the jury instructions. After you carefully consider the evidence, what is your individual decision to be? There are only two possible outcomes in this case. Only two. Grant Amato will either die at the hand of the governor of the state of Florida, or he'll die by God's hands behind the bars of the state prison. So how do we get to where we need to be in order to make the decision? As Mr. Stone has correctly stated, the state is relying on two statutory aggravators that Grant Amato has been previously convicted of capital felonies, and that the crime was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner. Now, Mr. Stone wants to utilize the crimes that you have found Mr. Amato guilty for in order to find one of those aggravators. And I know when you hear the term has been previously convicted of a violent offense, you're naturally thinking, is there something back in Mr. Amato's background, some previous violent felony before we all came together in this courtroom to decide this case? And the fact of the matter is that there's not. There are no prior violent acts in Mr. Amato's past. As a matter of fact, one of the items of evidence that y'all will hear and that I believe Mr. Stone is going to try and use against one of our mitigators is that back in June of 2018, Grant Amato, while employed at Orlando Regional Medical Center, was arrested for the crime of grand theft, a third-degree felony, and that ultimately, on November 30th, 2018, that charge was dropped. It was no information, as we say, and we have a document that we're going to enter into evidence to show you. So, other than the three convictions that we are here today about, Grant Amato has one prior arrest, and those charges were dropped. So our argument in reference to that is Mr. Stone is trying to get the death penalty for the three convictions that we're here on, the three verdicts. Our argument is that that was a transaction that relates to this courtroom today and does not constitute prior conviction. But that is for you to decide. Now, when it comes to the cold, calculated, and premeditated aggravator, I don't have to produce any evidence in order to fight that one. I'll use the state of Florida's own evidence against them. You remember in Mr. Stone's opening statement and in the evidence that the state pursued and all the evidence they entered in the guilt phase of this case, he said that my client, Grant Amato, was obsessed with Sylvie. He said he was addicted to Sylvie, consumed by Sylvie. And what you will hear in my closing arguments are that crimes of passion, crimes of rage are not cold or calculated or premeditated. Now, obviously, we're going to be putting on mitigation for y'all to consider. Regardless of the aggravators, we have mitigation evidence to present to you in order to assist us in regards to our appeal for Grant Amato's life. We have two statutory mitigators One is our argument that he has a lack of a prior criminal history. And our basis for that is to show you that other than that arrest, which the Orange County State Attorney's Office decided to drop and file a no information on, Grant Amato has virtually no criminal past until his arrest in this case. Now, Mr. Stone may try and argue that the arrest constitutes a prior criminal history. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard in voir dire, and you've been instructed by the judge throughout the guilt phase that you are innocent until proven guilty. You are innocent. And when the state of Florida down in Orange County in the Ninth Circuit decided to file that no information on November 30th, 2018, guess what? Grant Amato, still innocent. He walked into this courtroom innocent. He was innocent until you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, came back with those 3 verdicts of guilty. So we believe the statutory mitigator of no prior criminal history exists and should be considered by you. The second statutory mitigator that we're going to be arguing is Grant Amato's age at the time of the crime. Age at the time of the crime. Most times when you hear that, you think of a young person charged as an adult, 16, 17 years old, or a young adult, 18, 19, 20 years old. Well, normally that would be true, but we're going to be presenting testimony through our witness, Dr. Richard Carpenter from Tampa, that makes this statutory mitigator applicable. And how are we going to do that? What we're going to be doing, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. Carpenter is going to be getting on the stand, and he's going to be testifying about a clinical forensic evaluation that he did of Grant Amato. Grant Amato is 30 years old right now. He was 29 at the age of the crime, virtually the same age. And what Dr. Carpenter is going to tell you is that he was provided with historical materials. He was provided with school records, elementary school records, high school records, college records from the University of Central Florida. He was provided the Grant Amato's birth certificate showing when he was born. He was provided a certified copy of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's criminal history, which only shows, prior to this case, the one arrest in Orange County back in June of 2018, which was no information. He then went to the jail and met with Grant Amato. He'll testify that he spent over 3 hours with Mr. Amato. He gained information from Mr. Amato himself regarding his past history. He made observations, and then what he did was, as he went back to his office, he looked in his reference books to statistical information that's available with regards to inmates, Grant Amato's age, who have been sentenced to life in prison, and what is the likelihood of them committing any acts of violence whatsoever during their lifetime behind bars. And we'll be presenting you with it, not only his testimony, but he will be showing you the forensic evaluation facts that he came to. He'll also be showing you and referring to specific graphs so that he can show you visually what he's talking about. And his conclusion is that Grant Amato does not constitute a risk of future dangerousness if he were to be sentenced to a life behind bars. He will give that to you from an expert witness's perspective. Now, in addition to Dr. Carpenter, we're also going to be presenting some other witnesses as well. The first one is a gentleman by the name of Thomas Pachasik. Mr. Pachasik was also a co-worker of Cody Amato. He worked at Orlando Regional Medical Facility. He worked with Cody for the last 3 years of Cody's life. And during that time period, he'll testify that Cody and Mr. Pachasik had many conversations about Grant Amato, how close they were, how much Cody loved his brother. And after Grant Amato was arrested for these crimes, based on all of the knowledge that Mr. Pachasik had gotten from Cody Amato, when he found out that Grant Amato was in jail, he's going to testify that he went to the jail and he put money in Grant Amato's commissary account. Why did he do that? He'll tell you. He'll tell you he did it because he believed Cody would have wanted him to, because Cody loved his brother. You'll also be hearing from a lady by the name of Terry Robertson. You recall there was a woman by the name of Erica Johansson who interviewed Mr. Amato on the morning of January the 25th, 2019. Terry Robertson is also an employee of Accredo Pharmacy Express Scripts. She was also part of that interview that day. And the reason that I'm calling Ms. Robertson to the stand to present testimony to you is in regard to Grant Amato's employment, potential employment notwithstanding. He has a resume, and we're going to be getting that resume entered into evidence through Ms. Robertson so that you all can consider the fact that Grant Amato, during his lifetime, was a registered, critical care registered nurse, meaning that he provided care to the sickest among us. And that he did it from 2012 till the time of his, or prior to the time of his arrest, up till June of 2018. That's when he lost his job. But up until that time, Grant Amato was one of the individuals, like his brother, like Mr. Cisco, like anybody that works in the medical field. He provided health care to the sickest individuals among us. You'll also get an opportunity to look at an interview questionnaire that was filled out during the interview process, which showed that Mr. Amato was an outstanding candidate for that job before his arrest. Next, we're going to hear from a lady by the name of Jessica Bean. Ms. Bean is a physician's assistant. She works here in the Central Florida area. And she first met Grant Amato when they were attending classes at University of Central Florida. She'll testify about that. Later, she'll testify that they worked together at Orlando Regional Medical Center. She'll say that while he was in school, that Grant was a good student. She'll also say that when Jessica needed help with a patient, that Grant was always happily ready to lend assistance. That Grant Amato was a very nice person, and that she had knowledge of his relationship with Cody Amato, and that Grant loved his brother Cody. Finally, we'll hear from a Lieutenant Marshal Gasy with the Seminole County Sheriff's Department. Lieutenant Gasy works right over here at the Seminole County Jail. He's important because for the last 7 months, Grant Amato has been an inmate at the Seminole County Jail while these charges were pending. And what Lieutenant Gasy will testify to is that Grant Amato was a model prisoner during that time period, that he has no disciplinary reports, and that he was otherwise a well-behaved inmate there at the jail. And why is that relevant as a mitigator? Well, it should help you in your decision to our argument that Grant Amato will be a model prisoner in the state penal system if you give him the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. So, just like Mr. Sohn said, please listen carefully to all the evidence. Give it the consideration that I know you will. And I believe that after you hear everything about Grant Amato's life, and you look at this from the eyes of the individual, that you'll agree that life without the possibility of parole is the appropriate sentence. Thank you.